Hello and welcome back to another video. This time we're back in Project Motor Racing. It's been a little while since I jumped into PMR, but an update dropped over the weekend. Last Friday it was actually. So I took a couple of hours over the weekend and just decided to have a bit of fun, do some messing around, see what's changed, see what's better, see what's worse, and just generally get a bit of a sense as to what's actually going on in Project Motor Racing at the moment. But before we go any further, if at any point you find yourself enjoying this video, please remember to hit the like button. And should you feel so inclined, please do consider hitting that subscribe button as well, as it really helps me out. So prior to this, my last video on PMR was on the 8th of December, which was just after the announcement that there'd been some staff reduction. Now by that point, there'd already been a few updates made to the game and it was in a much better state then than it was on day one. However, I don't think anyone was under any illusions that there wasn't still a massive hill to climb for PMR. If I cast my mind back to just thinking about what the game was like then, from my memory, a lot of work had been done around changing the default setups. There'd been some improvements made to the GT3 tyre model and they were feeling really quite good, but they didn't feel quite as good as some of the older stuff that was available in the game. So some of like the NGT type cars, they felt quite far above everything else at that time. However, one class of car that seemed to come under a lot of fire more than anything else was the LMDHs. Now, I personally didn't drive them too much, so I can't speak for what they were like then, but I figured with the 24 hours of Daytona this weekend, why not replicate that in Project Motor Racing with a full 32 car grid, because obviously that's the maximum we can have right now in PMR, and get an idea as to if the performance has improved and also how the AI handles multi-class racing now. So I am running this race on 100% difficulty for the AI, which in hindsight was probably a bit of a mistake because I don't think the lines for Daytona are particularly brilliant right now. Partly I think the reason for this is because there was changes made to grip levels for AI LMDH cars, so I don't think the lines have properly been adjusted to accommodate for those changes. However, despite that, and despite my very limited knowledge of driving LMDH cars, I actually had a pretty good time. It wasn't perfect by any means, but then again, no game is ever perfect. The force feedback definitely feels a whole lot better now. I've spent quite a bit of time tweaking it and adjusting it to exactly how I like. So I've got a better sense as to how to get the best out of it now. And after making those changes, driving it was actually really quite enjoyable. I think the secret to unlocking the best of the Project Motor Racing force feedback on a per car basis is to reduce the per car strength, as that obviously has a knock-on effect on the rest of the EQ settings below. So by reducing that strength down from 1.0 to somewhere between 0.6 and 0.8, it really helps to tame any oscillations that you might be experiencing. And then again, reducing the mid EQ down as well also has a really big impact. Of course, your mileage may vary and I'm sure it depends on which wheelbase you're running, but if you are struggling with the LMDH cars, give that a try, it might just help you out. Something that I noticed throughout this race that still is happening, which had allegedly been addressed, but I think they need to do a little bit more work here. It's the unnecessary arcadey tyre smoke that comes off the back of the AI cars. It's not really adding anything to the effect of the game, and if anything, it's just making it look more arcadey, which I don't think is the direction that this should be moving into. So like I said, 32 cars is the maximum we can have on PC right now, and I think that's definitely a good thing for the time being. I'm in a fortunate position where I've got access to frame gen, and if I didn't have that now, I really don't think this would be as pleasant of an experience as what it is, but the performance optimization is still really, really bad out of the box. And I do think as well that if this was able to run at a solid, consistent 120 frames per second, it would really, really improve the overall experience of the game and people would possibly even enjoy it more. Obviously, there was some issues over the weekend around the patch related to console performance, which I believe have now been rectified, and people are saying that it feels really quite smooth on console. So obviously that is another dimension to the challenge of getting the performance nailed, because not only do they have to think about PC, but there's also console as well. However, if they can get it working smoothly on console, there's no reason as to why there should be any discrepancies in the PC experience. I'm of the belief that performance should be right up there as top priority for things for Straight Force to be focusing on right now. If they can get that right, then I think everything behind will just fall into line a little bit more naturally. I mean, they could have the best physics and handling model in the world, but if the game stutters and runs at 30 FPS, no one's going to play that. I've also mentioned this a few times, and I think something that would be really impactful for the community would be to get smaller but more frequent releases, and ideally not at like 5 o'clock on a Friday, because this is software development. Things can and do go wrong, and if you put out a patch on a Friday and it has a critical issue, like last weekend, then you've essentially signed yourself up to having to do work over the weekend to try and re-implement a fix for the fix that you just put out. I'm sure they have a very good reason for doing this. Maybe it's just the way they work. It might be something related to console releases. I honestly don't know, but I do think that that's a change that's really worth looking at, because smaller, more frequent releases, easier to test, easier to gather insights from the community on their impact, and easier to just move forward a little bit more iteratively. Not only that, but it also creates that sense of momentum. And I think ultimately, momentum is really just what Project Motor Racing needs. Now, obviously, there's a lot of people out there who they're frustrated with the game that we received, and rightly so. Obviously, we were sold something that is much greater than what we have today, and it's perfectly reasonable for people to feel upset, annoyed, disappointed, let down. That is all perfectly normal behaviour. However, I think what's worth mentioning that is not perfectly normal or justifiable behaviour is the way in which some people have conducted themselves in the Discord. I'm a fairly active member within that Discord, not as active as some, but fairly active. And some of the things that people have said in there are they're really not very nice at all, and nobody deserves to be treated like that. Being in a creative discipline is a hard thing to do. Obviously, you are always subjecting yourself to the feedback of others, and that's fine. There is a way in which you conduct yourself when providing that feedback. However, some people just don't seem to understand that at all, and the things they say to the team are just really, really awful. Like I said, perfectly normal to feel annoyed, but just imagine yourself at work and someone came along to the edge of your desk and started berating you for a mistake that you might have made, which wasn't directly even your fault. There's a lot of misdirected anger that goes on in that Discord, and I think people just need to think twice before they actually speak. Obviously, the team, they're open to feedback and they actively want constructive criticism, but the key term is constructive and not just being mean for the sake of it. So if you do decide to jump back into PMR and you have a couple of suggestions, head over to the Discord, pop it in the chat, and it will be picked up by someone. Personally, I've had quite a lot of fun playing over the weekend. It's definitely not perfect. There's still a lot of things that need to be improved. However, it's not unplayable like some people seem to think that it is. It has its quirks, and once you get your head around them, there's a very solid game underneath all of that. Obviously, in the future, the idea would be that you wouldn't have to get your head around those quirks and it would just be perfect out of the box, but no game is ever perfect out of the box. And judge it for yourself as well. If you own it and you've not played it for a while, give it another go and don't just take what people say on Reddit at face value. Try it for yourself. You might enjoy it. As always, these are just my opinions. You don't have to agree, but let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm really keen to hear about your experiences with PMR so far. And of course, if you've made it this far into the video, please do hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps me out. But until the next time, have a good one, and I will see you on the track.